Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very senior leader from corporate America, from the US, Mr. Don Springer. Don, welcome to the show.
Oh, Ashto, it's my privilege.
Thank you. Don is the chairman of the Colton Group, Incorporated. He's an independent board director and advisor. He's focused on board governance, growth strategies, and business model innovation. He's the director of Elm Analytics, LLC, which is the leading provider of supply chain optimization through data and intelligence. So, Don, we're going to talk about board governance and growth strategies today. But before we start talking about that, given your amazing experience, for my viewers and listeners, tell me about your own journey in brief.
It was an odd start. I got a degree in philosophy, and on the way to graduate school in philosophy, I stopped off for a summer job at Texas Instruments, a global electronics firm. Worked there and became enamored with technology and its application. And after I left there, I started a couple of ed tech firms and ended up at a small subsidiary of Ford Motor Company, helped them build that, moved to Europe and started the European business and serving 15 different countries. I came back to the US, and after we sold that, then did several startups, some with VC, some as bootstrap, et cetera, until finally I moved into straight advisory work and independent board work. So I've been doing that consistently for the last 10 or so years.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing this. So let's talk first about board governance. Now, it's a subject that is discussed very often around the world. But my first question to you, Don, is what are some common pitfalls boards face in governance, and how can they be avoided?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And, it depends on whether the company is a public company or a private company. If it's a private company, is it a family-owned company, or is it in the US an ESOP, an employee-owned company? All of those have different pitfalls, but I'll shorten it by saying this, Ashto. I think the public companies were very focused and have been rightfully so on compliance and risk for a number of years. And then back in the 70s began to turn to things like strategy, and recently have turned to, because of ESG and a lot of other things, have turned to the human resource side. And then certainly for the last 5 to 8 years, technology side with cyber and AI. So I think for public firms, the issue has been to focus too much on risk and compliance, which is needed, but certainly to bring in strategy and these other elements. And they've been slow to do that. On the private side, it's interesting. I find private boards are kind of a repeat of an operations meeting instead of a board meeting. And so their biggest struggle is trying to move from just an operational viewpoint to a strategic perspective.
Fascinating. Thank you. Can you also talk a little bit about the governance capital model that I read about in your notes and its impact on modern governance?
We developed that as a strategy team as part of University of Texas at Dallas. They have an institute called the Institute for Excellence in Corporate Governance. And we developed a governance model that really you can think of as resting on a couple of principles. One is co-governance between the board and the management team. So the management team has governance responsibility too when they're in a point where they ask, am I doing the right job for the right reason at the right time? But the other principle is also to be more strategic rather than tactical, as we talked about earlier. So we created a model that for the management team, they focus on things like organizational resiliency, competitive advantage, and stakeholder relationship.
Hmm.
And if they look at those three for part of their strategy, then they're able to build up a good governance within the management team.
Hmm.
On the board side, it's really all about alignment and trust and then effectiveness.
Hmm.
And so when you take those elements, and we have a whole host of assessment tools and et cetera, then you can survey yourself and also create some model and framework to govern an organization.
Well said. And the other question that I had, Don, was how can boards ensure they provide valuable insight and provide oversight rather than micromanage?
Yeah. That is probably using a skill that you're very good at, Ashto, which is questions.
Hmm.
Asking the right questions. Since boards can't have a handle like a direct responsibility on the activities, then asking the right questions. And most importantly, asking what question are we not asking?
Correct.
You
Correct.
find that to be the case as well in your experience with boards?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yeah. So, you know, whatever model, I think they can help management by, again, asking the right questions and alignment, making sure that management and the board are on the same page with
Hmm.
terms of mission and values, strategy, those kinds of things.
Hmm. You know, in India, about 10 years ago, the Companies Act was amended, and the fiduciary responsibility of a non-executive director is almost the same as an executive director.
Good.
So I'd love
Good.
to get your perspective on how should boards handle inputs from executive directors and non-executive directors, and what should non-executive directors do to protect themselves?
Well, I think that goes back to the culture of the board. You know, we talk a lot about cultures of organizations. Well, the
Mm,
board itself has a culture.
mm,
How open is it to asking questions, to challenging the chair,
yeah.
to challenging the executive director? If that's open and everyone has the opportunity to do that, then as a non-executive director, that is a way to protect yourself, is to ask the questions and
Mm,
look for the information.
mm. Well said. I also wanted to get your perspective on diversity. And you know, it's been after the Sustainable Development Goals have come in, the 17 SDGs. There's much more discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a lot of boards have taken very proactive steps. I'd love to get your perspective on what role does diversity play in board effectiveness, and how can boards improve?
Yeah, well, if we go back to the fact that everyone is asking questions on a good board
Mhm.
and they're making thoughtful decisions, then you can imagine where diversity has an impact on both of those elements. The cultural background, the experience of people in terms of race and cultures and genders, et cetera, but also their functional experience. Um, you know, when we take someone who has a wide background like yourself, who's operated in many industries, even if you set aside the culture and the gender, et cetera,
Mm,
all of that wide experience has an impact on our ability as a board, and you and I working together in a board
mm,
to make the right decisions. And I think it comes back to Asha, I think it comes back to biases.
mm,
We're finding in neuroscience so many cognitive biases that we are not aware of. And we certainly bring those to bear with our experience and our upbringing and those sorts of things.
Well said.
So I think it has a tremendous impact on, again, questioning and decision making.
Correct. But, you know, Don, I've had several conversations with a lot of women leaders
Mm-hmm.
who are on boards, and I've asked them a simple question. You've got you're sitting around the table, but do you have a voice? And a lot of them say, we are getting there.
Yeah.
Is that something you have also observed?
Oh, yes. And I think the responsibility goes on both sides of the coin.
Correct.
It's the responsibility of the other board members to recognize them. A good chair would make sure that everyone at the table has been recognized for a question. But it's also a responsibility on the individual to speak up. And I know when you come to a board for the first time, there's a lot of fear. I don't care how experienced you are. I can remember boards used to be comprised of only CEOs and CFOs or accounting people, maybe a lawyer. Now, thankfully, we're adding corporate HR people and technology people, et cetera. But because of that, a lot of people, even with those high roles, would have built-in fear of not wanting to embarrass themselves, making sure I'm asking something that's intelligent. So I think it's on both sides of the coin we have to work.
Very well said. Well said. One more question relating to board governance, then we'll move to growth strategies.
Okay.
There are the fiduciary boards and there are advisory boards. I, for example, now don't accept any more fiduciary roles at all, and I'm happy to be on advisory boards. My question to you is, what role do advisory boards play in governance, and how can they be effectively utilized?
Yeah, I like that you're beginning to sit on more and more advisory boards. I think advisory boards have tremendous impact. I know you're well aware that fiduciary board has legal compliances and those kinds of structures around them. Advisory boards do not report to the shareholder; they report to the CEO, who, and so it's like a group of consultants. Trusted body of consultants. And as you well know, that advisory board could be formed, let's say for 12 or 18 months if we have a strategic initiative for M&A. And so the composition of advisory boards changes and is different. And so I would say that the impact of advisory boards is more focused because of, again, the strategic initiative and the reason they were formed in the first place. The only pitfall to avoid on advisory boards is not to become just a loose conversation. That you have some structure, some chairman on the advisory board that can lead that advisory board to really add value for the CEO and the management.
Correct. And
now, do you find that to be the case?
Absolutely. This is so well said, because every time someone asks me to join an advisory board, I always ask the CEO, put down in writing what your expectation is from me. Very good. I will then confirm whether I can deliver. If I can't, then I don't think you need me on your advisory board.
That's right.
What a great response. Thank you. So Don, let's now talk about growth strategies. That's the other area that you have got a lot of expertise in. What, in your view, are the critical components of a successful growth strategy?
Well, I think Roger Martin is right about understanding where the company wants to play and how they want to win. And then do they have the resource and capabilities to support that? I think today growth strategy is also built on understanding very well the stakeholders that are going to be involved in that strategic initiative. So for instance, if we're going to enter a new market, who will be some of our suppliers, who will be some of our resellers, who will be some of our strategic partners, et cetera. And when we find and identify those people, transparency and developing relationships. What is our motivation? What is their motivation? What do we both hope to expect and succeed out of that? And that goes to understanding very much not only the partners, but the customer and what their desires are and what how they would voice those, how they would articulate those, and the very words they would use. And all those pieces, I think, play in a strategy. Now, once you start executing that, it's more iterative. You and I might develop a growth strategy, but then we've got to go test it and see if we get market traction. It's very much like me. It's very much like Sarah Sarasvathy, who does on entrepreneurial companies, is what resources do we have and where do we want to go? And so let's go test that and see if people self-identify and self-decide on what they want.
Well said. What are the key considerations? And you mentioned in the introduction that you worked in 15 different countries across the whole world. What are some key considerations to develop a growth strategy for scaling a business internationally?
Well, the first one, and I stumbled on this, but I would now do it first thing, is be sure you hire your leaders from within that country.
Okay.
It's no good for a country to move their people in and begin to build the business. And the reason is what we discussed earlier about the biases and the understandings and the cultures and the laws and practices, the unspoken practices of that country. So one of the things I did quite accidentally, Ashutosh, and now I would do it consciously, is hire country managers that were part of Sweden and Germany and Britain, et cetera. That helped a lot.
And what is your perspective on mergers and acquisitions to drive growth? And what should companies consider before pursuing an M&A strategy?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I think people look at, and I know my M&A friends are going to squinch a little bit, but I think people look for M&A as a growth strategy too quickly. You have to build organic growth so that you have something of value and leverage when you're in those discussions for M&A anyway. So you got to do that first. And then you will understand who are the right partners if you decided to go an M&A route to further grow. But as you well know, people under-expect the ease with which an M&A can be, actually another company can be merged. Besides the processes and the people and the customer relationships and all those things, there's also a cultural piece, and people really need to understand that takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of cost that's going to be incurred just to make that merger successful. So I would always consider organic growth first, and then look at M&A.
Well said. And what, in your view, are the main challenges companies face when entering new markets, and how can some of these challenges be managed?
Biggest challenge is not understanding the market when they enter a new market. And so all those things we've talked about, entering new countries and entering new growth, et cetera. It's a matter of doing it iteratively. And I'll take a page again out of Sarah Thossy's book about entrepreneurship, looking at it with affordable loss. If we have so much capital, how much are we willing to lose to learn something about the market, gain traction before we then actually start building in that market?
My next question, Don, for you is, what strategies can businesses employ to sustain growth during economic downturns? Or, for example, 3 years of the COVID pandemic that the whole world has just come out of.
Yeah, well, and we saw this. I think those who were successful did a couple of things, and they sound opposite, but one is to really double down on the things that as a company you're very good at and that you're very profitable at. And so you keep doing those and you invest in them. At the same time, there's lots of opportunities in down markets, and with the right technology, with the right people, more importantly, and doing it iteratively, you might find as a company that you find some new innovation new markets, new ways to address the market in those downturns. And again, it's a matter of just being very disciplined about what the affordable loss is to try those.
Right. And what role does customer feedback play in shaping growth strategies?
A tremendous amount, as you well know.
I know.
A lot of people do surveys, and I think we're finding out from psychology and social science that a lot of those surveys are ticked off. And so I think there's no replacement for actually meeting and talking with a customer face to face so that you can ask open-ended questions, so that you can listen to the language that a customer uses in really defining how they see their problems. And then at the end of the day, what are they really trying to do? Are they really trying to buy a drill, or is it that they're trying to put up a picture? And the drill just happens to be a tool to do that. And I think understanding what the job to be done, as he says, is considerable, and that's extremely important.
I just love this example of buying a drill versus wanting to hang a picture. Thank you. So don't have time for two more questions, and I'm going to now talk to you about your third area of expertise, which is business model innovation. My first question relating to this is, how can established companies adopt more agile and innovative business models?
Yeah, I think you have to do it consciously. And the first thing is getting everyone involved. So if a company has been smart enough to cascade decision rights down throughout the company so that people can be entrepreneurial, then you're going to get a lot of innovation, a lot of ideas coming out of that. The issue is how serious as a company and the company leaders of supporting that, reinforcing that, recognizing that, actually using those things that bubble up. And it's a question, I think, of looking at something like simple Porter's value chain. What supply provides what issue that we manufacture and deliver, and thinking about how you could replace that. Do we still want to build all of our products, or do we just want to sell and be an affiliate? Do we want to build our products, but do we not want to sell anymore, and we'll outsource the selling? And in looking at those value chains, you can talk about relationships with partners that can be innovative, or you can look at technology. It's interesting, Ashto. I'd be interested in your thoughts about this too. We're seeing that as AI comes on board, people are using it for the traditional things. How can it be more efficient? How can we speed things up, et cetera? And I think we're just now beginning to see that generative AI actually does something a little more than that.
Absolutely.
And so how do you really work with it as a co-partner in looking at innovative ways to serve customers and provide products and services that you wouldn't have thought of before? Do you think that's the case?
Yep. Oh, you're absolutely right. I think we're just about beginning to understand what generative AI can do for us.
Yes.
The excitement is very, very high all over the world. But I think I go back to the late 90s when the internet was coming in, and we were all excited. I could send Don an email, and that was a big thing. Now I don't have to worry about snail mail reaching you or sending a fax. But I think the whole concept of generative AI and all the power that's going to deliver to each one of us as an enabler for our decision making will be seen in the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. And, I couldn't agree with you more. When you think back when the internet first came on board, very quickly, the marketing departments put a .com on all their branding. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's what's happening with AI today. But I think we'll see that the business models that we're talking about will change considerably when you put AI in one of those elements of the value chain.
Very true. Very true. And my last question to you, and we've just spoken a little bit about this already. What, in your view, is the role of technology when it comes to business model innovation? And of course, that'll lead to growth strategies, which will lead to board governance.
Yeah, I think especially on the forefront of AI, we have to look at technology as a partner. People that use prompts in ChatGPT, for instance, where they look at ChatGPT as a respected assistant and provide them all of the information before asking the question. That's, in a funny way, that is beginning to personify the technology and to use it as a trusted partner in something you're trying to develop. And so I think very much that business models will be impacted by using technology as a partner, and it's going to evolve considerably over the next 10 years.
Well said. Don, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. Thank you for speaking to me about board governance. I think we covered a lot of ground on board governance. And as you said so rightly, there are so many different aspects of governance that need to be discussed. But I think your and my conversation on governance will get our viewers and listeners to think a lot more about some of the challenges or the opportunities in governance. Thank you for speaking to me about growth strategies. I think, with so much clarity, you were able to tell us about mergers and acquisitions and all the other opportunities and challenges companies have when they look at strategy. And finally, we didn't have enough time to talk in detail about business model innovation, but we did manage to get a lot of your thoughts. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Well, Ashto, you've had amazing background yourself, and you're doing important work with the brand called You. So kudos to you for that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.